dude. Careful.
Did you forget?
Realist Podcast. Welcome to the You Are Here podcast. This is episode 122 of the podcast. You know where to find a podcast: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube with video, Anchor.fm, www.yourheartpodcast.co. We cannot afford the M. Welcome back. Welcome home. We have another beautiful, beautiful episode. I'm going to shout out right now Formosa hot sauces. You want a tasty hot sauce? Local, made with love. FormosaSauces.com.
Yes, sir. That's the official hot sauce of the You Are Here company.
Oh, yeah.
You Are Here podcast.
You Are Here podcast.
Dude, today, I'm overwhelmed, man. I'm sweating.
A little nervous.
I got sweaty palms, man. I'm really excited to talk to you. Today we got Robert Machoian on the show, fresh off his new film, The Killing of Two Lovers. Robert, thanks for doing the show, man.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely, man. We got a list of questions for you, dude. We're really excited to talk to you. I'd like to just start rattling them off right now.
Yeah,
that's cool,
sure.
man.
For sure.
Yep.
So first question, man, to get to know you better, you have an extensive list of things that you've done in the past, and we've been, looking into them. When I came across the trailer, I was introduced to you by coming across your trailer for The Killing of Two Lovers, man. And something really spoke to me about it. The one thing that really stuck out to me was how, it's a thriller, but it's based in a very, very small town, and it seemed like real people. It seemed like almost like a documentary. And I was just wondering, when you tell stories, it seems like you're telling stories about people who are unheard from. There's characters who have been overlooked, I want to say. I was just wondering if, the small town aspect of your storytelling, has that always influenced you? Where does that come from?
Yeah, I grew up in King City, California, which is in Steinbach country in Central California. And it's pretty small. I mean, I learned pretty early on after leaving King City when I would talk to people and I'd say, "Oh, I'm from a small town." They're like, "Me too." And often they were talking about 30,000 people and I was talking about 5,000 people,
Oh, wow.
So how people think what a small town is pretty diverse. So, of course, it influences the way in which I kind of want to tell stories. I mean, obviously, I'm not interested in only just telling small town stories,
right.
But sometimes they just misrepresent, Hollywood. Sometimes it feels practical. They're making a film in a small town because it's a lot easier. If you watch some of these television crime dramas, they'll take place in these kind of 30,000 population towns because it's easier.
Yeah.
It's mysterious.
And then there's some stereotypes about that, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm kind of interested in the stories I've been telling in actually trying to get at the root of representing real people.
Yeah.
Their daily lives, their dialogue, the things that they worry about. For example, a lot of times they'll deal with a small town is normally Philadelphia or Pennsylvania kind of area, and it's they're working in the mines or they're working in factories, these jobs that are really going away, and that's fine. But then they often will address poverty as if it's the number one kind of focus point for the person. I might lose the job at the mine, or a kid choosing to go to college, and they're like, "I don't know if I want you to go to college," kind of thing. Yeah. And in my town, it was so very opposite of that. Many of my friends' parents worked in the fields. And were laboring, expecting their kids to go to college. It wasn't a discussion of should you go to college? It was no, you're going to college. You're gonna be a lawyer. You're gonna be a doctor. You're gonna be something that makes a lot of money, so that what I was doing is not in vain. And then while poverty is very real in the day to day, it's not the only thing they think about. I mean, it's they're living within that structure. And when we have that kind of in Killing Two Lovers, it's they're not impoverished in the context of the way that they live their lives. David's just working the job he wants to work, which is to be kind of, the handyman kind of person in that community. And so I wanted to make sure I wanted to remove it from those kind of discussions and start getting at kind of the root of it. So yeah, I mean, when I think about stories, I mean, regardless, I'm always trying to get at the heart of the honesty of it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Again, like superhero movies or whatever, but the ones I connect with are the ones that feel more real, you know?
Yeah.
It's hard for me when I'm like, what's Bruce Wayne doing? Like bothering purse snatchers. Why is he not going after corporate crime?
Yeah.
He has so much impact. He could take down like Batman episodes to me would be taking down government officials and like child trafficking and, and like
go hit
you
up
would
the
not
border.
be fighting one person.
Yeah. I hear you, man. Well, I think you do a good job of that with this, man. I really do. It's you get to the heart of the honest person. There's more textures to it. They're 3-dimensional. It's not just a 2-dimensional. People from the South going through some family issues, and struggling. But I think you did a really good job with that, man. I commend you. So, do you come from a family of storytellers? I was always wondering that.
Yeah, I do. My dad taught music for 45 years at the local high school and junior high.
Okay. Okay.
But he himself, I mean, I grew up, he wrote plays when I was a kid and would do local, like the community plays. He wrote a couple of those. But he's always been a storyteller. And then both my grandfathers are also storytellers in their own right. I mean, they work different jobs. My grandfather worked at the LA Times, and my other grandfather was kind of an engineer and dealt with boilers in DC. But they were always, what was interesting to me growing up was to see how they refined stories as they occurred. So, it's like you have that kind of weird experience when you come home, like someone cuts you off or, some weird interaction at the grocery store. I would watch them like refine that story to be hitting like all the appropriate beats and not be a rambler.
Yeah.
So that was really influential, especially with my grandparents, because they would tell stories over and over again. Sometimes they would not remember they had already told that story. So I'd watch as they like maneuvered. Yeah. So yeah. I mean, I very much grew up learning how to kind of contextualize a moment in time to have like narrative, to have an impact.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of the time in stories, like the things that stick out the most sometimes is like just the little details that can tell so much, right?
Poignant, specific details.
Especially when writing, I feel like something like that can mean so much. Just to describe a character or a moment or anything, right?
Yeah. To catch a character doing a thing, I think is really says a lot. When you see a character do a thing or say a thing, I mean, you get to learn about that person so much more. And I'm in the process of writing as well right now. I'm writing a feature with a buddy of mine. Shout out Adam Latter. And we drew a lot of inspiration from your story. We're dealing with the family drama as well. But I wanted to ask you, man, like, when with the conception of you becoming interested in story, you come from a family of storytellers. You're telling me, and when I think back, I can remember like my grandmother reading me Winnie the Pooh books, in my bedroom, and I was always really like taken away and moved. I could see the forest, I could see what she was saying. I remember contextualizing that stuff with my imagination. And I was wondering, like, the first time like story spoke to you, man. I don't know if you could go back that far, if you can try to like remember that. But the importance of story getting passed along, and when it hits us, I think it's a really poignant moment.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't think about it younger. My sisters were the ones when I decided to go into filmmaking. I was like, I wonder if this is a thing I should do. And one of them in particular is like, "Are you kidding me? The worst thing in the world was like going to watch a movie with you, because then after you talk about the blades of grass, like for you to describe what happened in a movie was like 4 hours and the movie's like an hour." They were like, so when I kind of decided to be a filmmaker, they were like, "Oh yeah, this makes complete sense."
Oh wow.
But for me, it didn't, because I grew up in a family that were storytellers, so it was just kind of the way it was. Like that's how you shared how your day went or how your life was going on. Or my dad always tried to tell stories as opposed to disciplining me with a like, you shouldn't do that. It would be like, so your aunt, and then he would tell a story, and the story was the thing of like, so don't do drugs.
Precautionary.
The story was the don't do drugs, not the literal words.
Gotcha.
So yeah, I mean, after I finished undergrad, I kind of went back. It just did kind of this introspective kind of period, of like what films influenced me that I could remember. You know, it's like when you go back to your records that you listened to in high school, and you're like, "Am I still proud of my high school self?" And there was one film that was so impactful. I remember watching it. And it was on PBS, and I was like, "Okay." It was about this guy who was like doing a documentary on this like person who was, you know, from the Civil War and was traveling, but then really he kept talking about his girlfriends and like kept meeting with girlfriends and interviewing them. And I remember being so impacted. So I had to search it down, and luckily we have the internet now. So I kept like all Googling these weird like guy talks about girlfriends and all this stuff. And I eventually arrived at this film called Sherman's March. And I went back and watched it again, and I was like, wow, this movie is really good.
Oh, wow.
And it made me really proud. And then I looked at how old I was at the time that the film came out, when it would have aired on PBS, and I was about 8 years old. And I was like, okay, I'm 8. I don't remember watching this movie with my dad or anybody.
Man.
But it made me really like super proud of like my little 8-year-old self. I was like, okay, I was drawn to films that weren't necessarily you know, blockbuster and esque, but the first blockbuster I remember really being drawn to, and it was probably one of the first films I saw actually in the movie theater, was Terminator 2. And that's another film that I've gone back to and watched and been like, yep, still
movie.
good.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Cameron definitely knows how to tell a story, even in a big budget level. The intimacy of like, you know, mother-son relationship, or, you know, the action elements are really well thought out. So, yeah, I mean, I'm really drawn to kind of drama more than I am necessarily action, but it was nice to look back and kind of be like, oh, I was being directed to kind of the right films, or I was being impacted by the right films as a kid.
Yeah. Man.
I wanted to actually ask, because you have a very extensive career, and you also teach and stuff, and you have so many shorts, and I even was looking into the one series you have, the Nobodies, and that's just like a person, and like it's for just the way you dive into like people's character. You could tell that you love filmmaking and you love story. You know, I feel like that really runs through. Did you always have like that same kind of I don't know if it was like maybe a purpose to your work, to tell a story? Maybe that's why you were telling it, or do you think that your purpose kind of changed over the years, or the love for filmmaking and storytelling?
Well, I grew up, I initially when I was in high school, thought I was going to just play in bands. I mean, you don't really make an effort to figure out how you're going to survive. Yeah. But my plan was to play in punk bands, and I was in underground kind of punk bands, and very much like Green Day at the time had become explosive, and within the community I was a part of, that was like a very negative thing. Like the impact of that was very negative. But it was very DIY. I mean, we would travel to the West Coast and, you know, sleep in people's, you know, floors and play shows in basements and garages. And so early on, I was the culture that I came up through was very much like the need to do it yourself, and not really ask for permission. I mean, the punk culture in general has no interest in asking permission from anybody to do what they're doing. And so in my 20s, you know, I pushed that as far as I could. And then, of course, I had to start thinking about how to like make ends meet. And the only, you know, then I started to understand why Green Day did what they did. I was like, oh, I see. Now you want to pay the bills, and you've done being, you know, starving. So I stopped doing music, and for a while I just worked jobs. I mean, I worked for a dry ice company, delivering like 14,000 pounds of dry ice per day.
Wow.
I managed a Jamba Juice for a while. And to be honest, when I started, what I realized when I worked for the dry ice company, I made $15 an hour, and the guy who worked next to me made $15.50 an hour, and he had been there for 20 years, and I had been there for 2. And so I was kind of really well aware of my future. And at the time, my grandfather came to visit, and he had joined World War II, and had gone to Purdue to become an electrician during World War II. And when he came, initially he was a taxi driver, and he told me this story again. This is the storytelling. He's like, I was a taxi driver making $40 a week. He's like, but then I went to World War II, got my engineering, and I came back and I became electrician making $20 a week. And I was like, well, why would you ever make $20 a week when you could make $40 a week doing taxi? And he said to me, because I can see the future. I could see the future. I continue to make $40 a week, with the taxi, where he knew over time. Yeah. And that made me need to go back to school. I was like, okay, in 20 years, I'm going to be making $15.50 an hour. And the guy, because of the amount of weight we lifted every day, the cartilage in his wrists were so built up that he couldn't move his wrists.
Oh, man.
And he was 54 and he looked like he was in his 60s. I mean, sometimes he would even try and get the senior discount at Denny's.
Oh, man.
Damn. So I knew I needed to go back to school, and I was trying to figure that out. I had taken some classes and nothing was landing. It was like I would just, make it halfway through the semester and then quit because again, the dryest job was very physically demanding.
Yeah.
And then I had my daughter, and I made this little doc on her about being 3 years old, and it was just about her being 3. And it took me like a week and a half to I was editing an iMovie and cutting it together, and anyways, after I finished that, and I watched it a million times, refined it, the things you do, I was like, oh, I could make it through school being having a film degree. Uh-huh. And so knowing that I was going to pursue film made my anthropology class easier, my speech class easier, because I was like, who cares about those classes? They just need the GPA from them. So it really impacted my perspective. But the punk rock culture thing is what really impacted the filmmaking in the sense of not asking for permission.
Right.
I mean, when I finally got into film school, I learned really quickly, okay, my junior year, we're making maybe one film, because your directing class was about directing, but you didn't really direct anybody. You just learned directing theory. The cinematography class was learning how to light and how to frame and to move camera. But they would be these little 1-minute group things. And so I had met Rodrigo Hedebeck. He was there as an undergrad as well. And I was like, you want to make stuff? And he was like, yeah, sure. And I had started thinking about the American Nobodies series because at the time Paris Hilton was just famous, and I didn't understand why in the world she was famous. And Jello Biafra, who's the singer of this band called the Dead Kennedys, he has this saying where he says, don't fight the media, be the media. So I was sitting around complaining about Paris Hilton, and then, of course, that quote comes into my mind, and I was like, oh, I got to try and offset it. And I know it's not going to have I'm never going to have the same impact as Paris Hilton, but at least I'm doing something about it. So Rodrigo and I started the American Nobody series with that mandate in mind. And the mandate was really asking people, hey, do you have any friends that do anything that's cool that we could document? And they've been, they're like, yeah, my buddy unicycles and he taught all his kids to unicycle. And I'm like, could you call him and ask if we could do a doc on him? And then they would. And then we just roll up and do a doc on him. And so that started the American Nobodies, which was really awesome to do. And then again, it supported me learning how to pull focus, because Rod's doing sound. I'm the only person on camera. We don't have a remote focus puller. So I just have to learn how to pull focus while I'm doing these camera moves.
Yep.
So in total, we did 54 of those in about 3 years. So it really informed the filmmaking aspect. And then me shorts are just as important as features because you can experiment, think about a concept that you don't know already. Like, hey, I just want the camera to be moving the whole film. Then shoot a short film where that's the idea. The Miners, when I did the Miners in 2018 with Oscar Jimenez, it was I had done a lot of things in natural light, and I was like, I don't want to do anything in natural light anymore. I want to rent the lights. I've got $1,000. Let's rent the lights and write a story based off of that.
Right.
What I wanted to ask then, because you obviously did, and I love that you say that shorts are as important as features.
Yeah.
I kind of wanted to ask, or was there a moment where maybe you could say because I read in an interview that The Killing of Two Lovers started as a short. Was that correct? Or the idea for it was?
Of Killing Two Lovers?
Yeah.
Yeah. It was the date scene in the film was the first part that I wrote, which was just
So I
it was
wanted
about 11 pages.
I wanted to ask, when did you find that you wanted to turn it into a feature, or what caused that?
So the feature idea was motivated by so Clayton and I had been trying to work together. And the film we just finished, The Integrity of Joseph Chambers, is actually the film we were trying to get made when he landed Lethal Weapon.
Yeah.
So I was actually out in Alabama. We were shooting a little spec for it, and he got the job offer. And so there was this period of time where he and I were, while he was on that show, that he and I were trying to find something. But his schedule just wasn't, he'd be shooting for 8 months. He'd have a couple months off, and then he'd have to do press. So there really wasn't any time to squeeze a feature in there. And so I wrote the short and I sent it to him. I was like, hey, come on, this is like 3 days. Like, could we, if I put, 10 grand together, could you come out and we just shoot this short? And it was really like we had been talking for so long. I started to get nervous. Like, what if we just don't have the same ideas of making, and all of a sudden we built this relationship for nothing. I mean, not that it wouldn't be nothing because we're good friends, but you're like, we build this whole artistic aspect. And so I wrote the short and sent it to him, and he loved it and was like, yeah, I think we could do this. And then he was like, just give me some time. And then he called me like a couple months later, and he was kind of planning to leave Lethal Weapon. He was like, it's just not for me. Could you stretch this out to a feature? And if I put the money up, would you be willing to? And I was like, yeah, sure. So I went into it knowing he was gonna put the money up, and that we didn't have a lot of money. And I had been down in Kanosh working on another project, and was like, this would be a great place to shoot. And that street in particular, I was like, I had watched a couple films that had been plays initially, and then they became features, And sometimes that translates well, sometimes it's awful. And I knew like we had limited location, so I wasn't going to make a play, but I was like, what could I write that would exist within these two homes? And how much could I build within these two homes? So I wrote extending that out, knowing that like, one, that what resources we had, and then two, where the location would be, which that's for me really helpful from a writing standpoint to kind of know what's going on.
Man. All right, I got some questions from my filmmaker friend Adam Lauder. Shout out again, buddy. He wanted to ask you specifically this, and I think it's great because it was what you were just talking about. This is back before, he was asking, dating back before you made a feature film. How did you overcome self-doubt or the doubt of others who had yet to see you prove yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, the honest answer is like never. You just never do. It's never going to happen.
Man.
When Martin Scorsese said he like throws up before production, I was like, okay, I'm never gonna, never gonna get over, especially as things like with 40 Years for Yesterday, for example, or even going back to like the beginning, like Charlie and the Rabbit and Ellen and the Astronaut, which were significant short films that I made. Ellen and the Astronaut got into BFI London, and that was right out of undergrad.
Wow.
And so you're very nervous, should I be a filmmaker? And that to get into BFI London was a little like, yeah, you should pursue this. And then when I was in grad school, my first year of grad school, we shot Charlie and the Rabbit. But both of those, like Ellen the Astronaut's my daughter, and Charlie and the Rabbit's my son. And we're shooting out in Davis. The short cost us, maybe $25 to make. in the idea of like, if this thing sucks, nobody needs to watch it, you know? And you just kind of proceed forward with that, that mentality. And then 40 Years from Yesterday, which is the first collaborative feature with Rodrigo, budget was like 10 grand. Wow. So again, it was like, for $10,000, the investors, I was up front, like the chance of you getting your money back is like zero. It's like, but we'll make a really great film and you'll be proud of it. And really like what you can hope for is just being proud of getting a film. And that ended up going on to the LA Film Festival in Locarno, which was a pretty big deal. But again, from a psychological standpoint, Rodrigo and I were like, well, this thing tanks. It's really just $10,000. And the investors that we had borrowed the money from was very little. You know, like it wasn't like your mom and you knew it was coming out of her savings account. They were people that had this money lying around, and if they never got it back, they were okay with it. So that was the way to come over the psychological kind of paranoia. But that's been consistent. I mean, God Bless the Child we made for like $12,000, and then we won a grant that from San Francisco Film Society. They gave us the post-production money on it. And then even Killing of Two Lovers, again, very nerve-wracking, but Clayton was like, hey, I'm going to put this money in. If we lose it, it's okay. Let's just like work together and prove that we have a good work ethic. Right. That was like really relaxing, but it doesn't remove you're like, oh, maybe I'll just get in a car accident on the way down and die. And then it was like, man, like the potential of this guy had so much potential, you know, it just didn't happen. And we could talk about like what could have been like a lot more than, you know, what actually happened. Yeah. So the self-doubt doesn't really go away. You just learn to like step into it.
Yeah. Okay.
And you just kind of work through that kind of reality. I mean, the shorts for me are always ways to kind of build some sort of confidence in the sense of, again, they don't cost very much. They could go nowhere. Yeah. I mean, again, The Miners was my dad and my 3 boys, you know, so the risk was like so very low still. Yeah. And it's navigating now where I'm having discussions with studios about $5 to $20 million budgets. And I would say the only confidence I have found myself relying on is how well the other films have done. And so it's just a need to be like, okay, 4 years from yesterday, which to me is still like, yeah, I'm proud of the film, but I don't encourage people to watch it because it's so heavy. And Rod and I didn't totally know what we're doing as far as emotional tone for people. Mm-hmm. But it still got into Locarno, which is a massive festival in Switzerland. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's like, again, it's doing these things that shouldn't have, like, again, the budget for Killing You Two Lovers, I have met filmmakers at Sundance with short films with bigger budgets.
It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable.
So for that, you know, when Clayton and I started making it, it was like, Clayton was like, oh, I hope this thing will get into Sundance. And I'm like, you're well aware that even in the next category, most of these budgets are sitting in the, you know, close to $1 million. You're aware of that, right? So like, let's keep our expectations in check. Yeah. And then for it to get in there is exciting. So you start to have to lean on, like, I don't know how the filmmakers that have never made a film somehow have an uncle landed $5 million deal making, you know, a film for a studio. I don't know how they wrestle with it, with the fact, because the reality is they have no business making that film.
Right.
So I can't help you there, but the constant making is when you is where you build your confidence. That's why when you look at, you know, my filmography, you're looking at a lot of films. Because I'm just trying to build the craft. It's a weird play. Filmmaking's weird because they put so much weight on your first film. And I'm like, can you imagine if they put that much weight on a painter?
Gee.
Let's see your first painting, buddy. You're 11 years old. Let's see. You know, it's like, holy crap, the amount of weight they put on people. And it's like, you're still learning. I mean, I just worked on this. So Killing Two Lovers was me, Oscar Jimenez, who was in the process of graduating from college, And then Nicole Hawkins was my first AC. She had just graduated. Sarah Hornberger was the second AC and travel, dealing with the actors. And then Drake Withers was a former student of mine who hadn't graduated. He just had stopped going to school. Like that was the crew. So I worked on a commercial like 5 months ago, and that was the first time I ever had an AD. I was like, okay, what does this job do? So there's just a lot of moving parts and a lot to learn that I think you have to start to. You got to work on films early on just to build your confidence of like. Scorsese does wides and close-ups. Like that's what he loves, Yeah. And how do you know that you like that? It's like you just have to keep shooting, and then you start to learn your language. Nobody, if Malik started shooting on a 125 millimeter lens, everyone would be like, "What in the world's going on?" Right? I mean, he's as ultra wide as he can get, and most of his stuff is handheld. People start to really get into their languages. Even Soderbergh, who does so much experimental stuff, his aesthetic is pretty locked in.
Yeah. Well, man, you're talking about, this is so cool, and thank you so much, man, for talking about your artistry, man, and the experience you've gathered going forward, and now you have your own language, and we're seeing it unfold with The Killing of Two Lovers. I loved a lot of the shots. I loved a lot of the wides that were in the film. But working with actors, man, I know you've gotten this question in other interviews before, and I want to make sure it's a very specific question, because I'm an actor, and being on the other side of this thing, you've worked with a lot of non-actors before, and I know that's probably something in your language that you've gathered through the years of making films, working with your own family and working with actors now, stepping forward. And I'm sure the doubt was there. I'm sure that I'm nervous feeling is there to work with these people, and I hope they, deliver. But I also hope I can communicate with these people. What was it like on the other side of this project, looking back, and also moving ahead with your, I don't know if you're more interested in working with actors, moving forward, or you want to get back to maybe working with more non-actors?
Yeah, it's a mix. I mean, again, it depends on the project. The shorts, I have no real issue working with non-actors because, again, you don't make money off of shorts, so you should be in a place where you're kind of working and learning and growing as a maker in that world. In the features, what it allowed me to do was to write a lot differently. Non-actors are like singer-songwriters, right? You're not going to write a Lady Gaga song for Bob Dylan. It's just not going to happen, right? Yeah. He's a great singer. He's got a great, obviously great storytelling ability, but he's got only a certain number of range, Yeah. Even Frank Sinatra, he's got one octave he can sing in, for the most part. And so you end up having to write for that. When you're writing for non-actors, if you know that you're going to cast your parents in a movie, you have to write as close to your parents as you possibly can. You have to look at their lives and be like, all right, what's interesting about my parents? What drama could I create that would be interesting to people who don't know my parents? But my parents are willing to give me, 6 hours a day for the next 3 months, So you very much write for that. When you start getting an opportunity to work with Seppi, for example, all of a sudden it's okay, she's got a lot of range. So I can start to write in a way because she can do say 4 different octaves or 3 octaves, and she has the ability to go up and to go down. So I can write the nuances in a character that slowly builds over time, an argument that starts here and ends over here. So that was really revealing, with having Klain, Seppi, and Chris on set, and then they all work very, very differently. They all have very different approaches to the aesthetic and what they're looking for, and that you have to learn as well. You're okay, you approach, Chris, for example, he would do takes differently to try and give me options. It was what do you? Here's how I'm interpreting the material. How are you interpreting the material? And how do we arrive at a place where we both are really excited about both concepts? So he would do things differently every time. And he would fluctuate the degree of pressure. So, for example, in the coffee scene in Killing Two Lovers, he did one take, for example, where he just sits there and you can tell he's like thinking about last night, and he gets a like big, massive grin on his face, and he says something to David like, "Man, last night was amazing," and walks off, and you're like through the roof as an audience, and I'm like, okay, that's too far. And he's like, okay, yeah, that was probably too far. And so then he like dials it back and kind of just has a coffee interaction with them. And it's like, well, I think we could do something like a little in between, like, and step up to him. I was like, can you step a little bit closer? And funny, he was like, my nuts are on his leg. And I'm like, okay, so we're really close, and then it's like this matter of like really honing in. And that was really exciting to get to work with. Clayne normally had a very, very clear idea from his and our discussions about the character and how the scene would happen. And he would just be honing that kind of discussion and then making little tweaks if it were necessary. Okay. So those approaches are very, very different. So when you start to work, what I learned anyway, starting to work with trained actors is like they all have different approaches. And so you have to navigate that. But the exciting aspect is how far you can kind of push the material. All of a sudden, you're in a position where you can really kind of, again, be more nuanced. You guys were saying earlier, like the subtlety of something begins to be more important. So, for example, in the argument scene, when David is like picking at the truck, that adds a layer of like, this guy is like, he can't tap his foot because he's standing. He just needs to try and like Fight Club, he's trying to get to the penguin.
Yeah.
And he like can't get there. So those little nuances are from a directing standpoint, those are really exciting. You can start removing dialogue and start replacing it with performance.
Yeah. I mean, I noticed that nuance with the tapping of the truck and the shot itself, man. I just gotta say, I'm not blowing smoke. But I stood up out of my seat, man, and I really was like screaming at the screen because you see the house in the back and you see all that he's losing and you see him at the truck and he's really at the end of his rope. So I just think that was an incredible shot, man.
Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Moving forward, I got a couple more questions from Adam. I know you got one or two more questions, then we'll get you out of here, brother. I'm sorry, I got so many questions from Adam, bro, but we talk about this a lot too. As a filmmaker, there is probably some things that you are not things that you don't enjoy about the business. I want to call it the business of filmmaking. So, in a perfect world, what would the process be like for you and for all of us? What would it look like? That's such a broad question, but.
Yeah, I mean, the business aspect that's very challenging is the financial side of it. I mean, people always ask me, how do you raise money? There's not a math to raising money. Yeah. If you, depending on what book you read, it's like, ask wealthy people, so that part of it is always really challenging. And then the flip side of that is the influence of who you're casting based off of could that bring financial gain, right? Man. If you have Matt Damon in a movie, then you can have $20 million for your budget. But for me, like Scoot McNerney is just as good as an actor as Matt Damon in my book, and I really love him, but he can't bring $20 million. So that aspect of filmmaking, and I'm just really entering that world right now with new films, but that's really hard for me because I would just love to work with like, I would like that not to matter. I'd love to be like, hey, this person's great, let's just cast them because they're amazing and they're going to make the film amazing. And you're just like, oh, the budget went from 20 to 5 or 20 to 3.
Yeah.
Then you're like, is that impacting the type of story I want to tell? So those aspects are challenging. Distribution is impacted by that as well. People are more comfortable going and seeing a Matt Damon movie, right? Than maybe, even Joel Edgerton, who I think is unbelievable as an actor. Again, just as good as someone like a Matt Damon or Ben Affleck or even a Leonardo DiCaprio. Why he's not as big as them? It's nuts. And it's like, I would hate to be in a position where you have to choose someone other than him when like he's who you really think should be in the film. So those aspects of filmmaking are always the part I wish didn't exist. I wish you could write a script, people got excited about the script and you were in the process of making it. Because I mean, there's tons of garbage movies out there. It's like just because you do those things doesn't guarantee that the movie's good. Like Bruce Willis is just doing garbage now.
Yeah.
Like nobody cares. But in Europe and in wherever lands that he still matters, people cast him. And I'm like, I wish you could, like, we would acknowledge that, like, those movies are garbage as well. So maybe take some of these smaller actors and build them up and, like, help them build careers.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, I don't even, because I remember, like, as a kid, even before, like, getting into filmmaking stuff, it's like, I feel like I go to the movies and be like, oh, it's a new Denzel movie.
Right.
It's like, it's the name.
Yeah.
You don't even, half the time we don't even care about the story.
You're
before
buying
you
the
even
ticket because you're about to watch Denzel.
Like, I know it's Leo. I know it's Dan. Like,
yeah.
You know that.
It's like cereal. You know what you're buying.
Yeah, it's like I think it's getting better now, at least with even I feel like a film crew is so many people, right? So many different roles, and even those people on these huge movies barely get the recognition. So it's tough. That's definitely one of the
that's why
parts.
I think I was most excited to talk to you, man. Is you're inspiring a lot of us through the process of what you're doing in your career path and in the way it's working out and shaking out now. To be able to through a quarantine, like turn on my TV and watch or go to the theater and watch an indie film about like real town people that don't necessarily have a voice, and to look at the budget, man, I was blown away. To be honest with you, I was completely blown away, man, and it's no small feat. And it inspires us, me and Mikey here, and the people that we are in our circles,
our whole group.
So yeah, man, it's really cool to get the chance to talk to you and to hear your story because I think it's going to influence a lot of us, and the integrity of a story and the importance of a story, leaving something behind for the rest of us, man, is really cool. So I want to say thank you again for that, dude.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, absolutely. You got more questions for Rob, dude?
I had all the ones listed, but I came up with two. Have you made anything having to do with punk?
Oh man,
I could tell that runs deep in you.
Yeah.
And would you ever want to?
Yeah, and I've been trying to figure out the approach, and I haven't cracked it yet. Yeah. I mean, the Miners was a nod to Minor Threat, of course, which is one of my favorite bands, and this idea of starting bands or wanting to be in bands, and coming from kind of straight edge punk rock culture, it's such an interesting subset of punk rock. That has had these evolutions of like really positive evolutions in the beginning, and then like weird evolutions with like extreme veganism and like some of the stuff they did in the 90s, which is very, very weird. But yeah, I haven't been able to like crack the narrative. I mean, I don't know if you saw that film Green Room, but it was one of the ones that I thought, I was like, they did such a good job of like being in this world. So I'm definitely interested. I just haven't found the way in,
I feel you.
What's the story? What's the narrative? I mean, being on the road and like playing shows and stuff like that's great, but there's not really a dynamic because the punk culture really wasn't. You weren't hoping that you hoped to get signed to a label, but the label was like your buddy or a friend of your buddy who was starting a label and like in the process, and they'd really release a 7-inch or maybe an LP if you got you got big enough, but you didn't have any false ideas that eventually you would go on and make enough money to survive. So there was never it was an interesting part of the community to be involved in because there wasn't an end objective. You went in naively like, I'm just going to play in bands, I'm going to tour, and there's going to come a point where I can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
And then I'm not going to be able to do it anymore. And then I'm in my 40s now, and what I'm seeing is some of my friends are now in careers, and then they're resurging. They're not starting the same bands, but they're now all starting bands now. And it's interesting. There's a band called Change, and there's another band called Berthold City, and they're all the guys that were in straight edge bands when I was coming up. Now they all have kids, and they're like, well, we can still do the band thing, and they go on tour for like a week because
Wow.
they're like, well, we can take vacation time. So they're still, it's interesting. But again, they're just doing it now because they love it.
Yeah.
And they love the community.
Exactly.
So what's the drama angle? I haven't found my way in yet.
There's one there. There's gotta be. There's gotta be.
Yeah.
Man. Last question. Last question.
There you go, man.
I'll let you go. For someone who's listening right now, sitting at the edge of their seat, man, in their cars or whatever you're doing right now, storytellers, actors, filmmakers, directors, producers, future entrepreneurs in the storytelling world, like that don't quite know what to do next, man. What would be something that you can leave behind? What would be something that you'd want to tell these people? We'd want to tell us, me and Mikey. Piece of advice.
I think you just, again, I think you need to constantly find ways to kind of make work and to find, the intimacy of your voice. David Bazzani is one of my favorite singers. In Pedro the Lion, he has one of the lyrics of one of his songs. He says, it's something to the fact of, my father told me that hell would have no flames, just a front row seat to watch your true love pack her things and walk away. And you're like, oh, holy crap. Like, you just laid out, like, you just said so many things in that those like 3 sentences, right? In the making process of filmmaking, that's really what you have to like start to try and dial in, is like, what are the unique aspects of like the life that you're living, so that you can start to like tell it from that kind of like perspective. And then just stop getting in the way of yourself. I did a series after 40 years from yesterday. It was such a grueling process that I shot 10 short films on my phone with just the 8mm app. And I watched a lot of foreign films. And so I read a lot of subtitles. But Rodrigo is Peruvian, so he speaks Spanish. And whenever we would watch films that were Spanish as a language, sometimes we'd be sitting there and he was like, no, that's not what they said. And I'm like, oh, really? What'd they say? And then he would kind of explain. He's like, those subtitles are off. And it started making me think about like, how could subtitles play a role in storytelling that wasn't just to translate the dialogue. So I made these kind of 20 films, and they were just one of them is like my dad's just like working out, and he's just like lifting weights. That's all he's doing is like these little pink 5-pound weights. But the narrative that I wrote in the subtitles started to reflect upon like the fact that he was trying to be healthy and he was trying to live longer. But the result of living longer was that his wife died before him, and his son died before him, and his daughter died before him. And in the end, he did live a long and healthy life, but ended up alone. And it was like, okay, but we're just watching him like work out. How can this narrative have like a different narrative? And I did another one where it's just a kid. She keeps like, it's my son, and I put him in a little cape, and he just keeps jumping. He's trying to fly, and he keeps landing on the like an old mattress. Mm-hmm. And the subtitles are something like, his mom told him he could be, he could become anything he put his mind, become anything he set his mind to. And so he set his mind to it. And you're like, can I tweak this phrase where it's like, you can grow up to be anything you want? And you're like, all right, superhero. And it's like, well, okay, well, not that, And I just made them in this, like, they're mainly single shots. And I made it as a way to like, I want to be a filmmaker, and I want to make films. And I made them really with no expectations. And I showed them to somebody, I was like, aren't these are kind of cool, right? They were like 3 minutes long. My buddy's like, well, you should submit those to Sundance. And I was like, yeah, right, dude. Like, I've seen like Sundance shorts are shot on, 35mm. These guys from New Zealand I met, their budget was $120,000 for their short film. And they had Peter Jackson's crew on their days off when they weren't shooting Lord of the Rings. Super great guys, but I'm like, no one's going to take these films. So I just submitted out of like, sure, I'll submit them. And in the end, they picked 2. And so I had these 2 little iPhone films, playing at Sundance. And I'm in a Q&A with people that spent $45,000 to $60,000 on their short, like being like, what's this dude doing here with these little like iPhone shorts? And and that was not the objective. The objective was to like, again, keep filmmaking. I had to like get away from the expectations or the idea that things were gonna like. You can't put like the pressure that every film is going to be the thing that launches you. Yeah. You have to like just make them and be like, be able to tell whether it's good or not, and start to, it's like when you have a kid, it's like nobody looks at the child and figures out if they have a cute baby or an ugly baby. But as a filmmaker, you have to look at your film and be like, it's ugly. It's just going to live on the hard drive, or it's valuable and I'm going to put it out in the world. It's worth it to put it out in the world. Yeah. But if you don't make enough, that pressure that was asked about earlier, it starts to pile on because you actually don't have enough experience. And so your brain's like, I shouldn't be doing this. And it's telling you shouldn't be doing it because of all the things you haven't done. And if your partner's making, spaghetti, like film them and be like, can I make, 2.5 minutes of making spaghetti interesting? Because if you can, then you're like, okay, maybe I can expand this.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you, man. Wow.
Do
you have another question?
No, I just want to say the biggest things I got, I think, because I've been struggling to write my second short. You already know it's been too long.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
But I think just from you saying like the experimentation, and that the amount of pressure you get just as like your first film, like expecting it to be this like amazing, like I barely have funding, like
the world's
just hearing that, I think, I don't know, it changed my mind a lot about it.
That's beautiful.
So thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Yeah, man. I mean, you got to write shorts to what you have access to.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really important to not. I mean, again, we're all creative. We can all write things that we don't have access to. I when I met my screenwriting teacher, he was like, "And if you want to go to Hawaii, write a film in Hawaii. You want to go to Morocco, write a film that takes place in Morocco." And I'm like, "Sweet, I'm gonna write a bunch of films that nobody buys, and that's great." Where in reality, if you have access to things, I mean, think about what you have access to. And you really should write a short film with what you have access to, because somebody has access to, my dad was a music teacher, so the first short I wrote was about him being a music teacher, because I had the band room, I had all the instruments, I had access to the principal's office. I'm like, all right, all these things are free now because I wrote a film that like related to like what my dad had, what I had access to. The Miners was shot. It started in my dad's house. My wife has a venue in our basement. So she throws shows in our basement so that local bands here can like learn how to perform in front of people. And I'm like, all right, we got the speakers, we've got the drum set, I'm going to write the Miners because I've got access to a basement, band room. It's like, it still cost me $6,000 because I like had to rent the equipment and the sound. For me, the sound budget is so significant. It's a skill set I can't do. So sound was $3,000 on that. Wow. And so you got to really get out of getting in your way. Like, don't write the cop drama that you don't have access to a cop car, or cop. Don't write a hospital drama that you don't have access to a hospital room. Like, really think about what you have. I mean, if you look at Mark Maron's stuff, it's like, it takes Mark Maron's episode 1 is podcasts, right? Yeah, it's like he has access to people and podcast, and a room with podcasts. What narrative could you make up? I think when you do that, you'll hone your skills better. And if it's a good short, it's a good short because you know the world.
Yeah. Big words, man.
Oh. Come on.
All right, man.
If you want to go see the film, I highly suggest you go see it, guys. It's The Killing of Two Lovers. You go on the Neon website right now and find local listings, local showtimes, or order on demand.
Boom.
Mikey, take us out of here, man.
There you go. All right. Thank you so much, Robert. I appreciate it so much. All right. Your Podcast, episode 122, man. You know where the podcast is: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube Video, Anchor.fm, www.yourpodcast.co. Thank you so much. My name is Mike. I'm signing out.
Hey, my name is Dave. I love you all. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you, sir.
Awesome. Thanks,
Dude,
man.
Thank you so much, man.
Beautiful.
Thank you so much, bro.